they want to be able to enjoy their day as guests at their wedding and not worry about any of the logistics or any of the little issues that might crop up. There's so much emotion that comes with planning a wedding. They need somebody there on their side to trust and to bounce ideas off, and that can be anything from, trusting what supply to go with to managing maybe a difficult relationship dynamic in a family. So
it can be actually quite stressful, and it doesn't make it the fun experience that it's meant to be.
We say it all the time, but it really does hurt getting ghosted.
For someone that's just sort of starting out, they're recently engaged, starting their wedding planning journey, where should they start? What sort of things should they be thinking about first?
Okay, so
hello and welcome to the I Do's and Do Nots podcast. If you're planning your dream wedding, then this is definitely the podcast for you. I'm Chris Wardle. I'm a luxury wedding videographer from Lifestyle Visuals, and each and every episode I'll be joined by a range of wedding experts to discuss tips, tricks, the do's, the don'ts, all when planning your special and unique day. So let's get into today's episode. So today I'm pleased to be joined by Bethany from Bethany Rose Weddings. You're a wedding planner from Lincolnshire. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got into weddings?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, first of all, Chris.
You're welcome.
So my experience in the wedding industry came about firstly because I was originally a waitress, doing lots of hospitality, that kind of thing in my early career. I then went and did lots of travelling. I worked in Jamaica doing weddings. Wow. I worked in Australia doing lots of hospitality, restaurants, that kind of thing, working in lots of luxury hotels. And from there, I came back to the UK and I realised maybe I should get a proper job, as people say. Yeah. And I fell into more of the corporate event side of things. From there, I learned so much about meticulous planning and logistics and really how to run a successful business from big corporate companies. But my love of weddings and that people aspect was not there in that corporate industry, which is why I decided to set up my business in weddings and fell back in love with the enjoyment of making people happy and having those personal connections and those relationships and bringing joy to people, which the corporate industry just didn't give me as much.
Yeah, no, that's what we were saying just before on the feedback from weddings is kind of unrivaled because it's such an important part to the couple's journey, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the next section that I go on to on every episode is kind of like a get to know you quickfire questions round. So the first few questions are quite generic, and then we'll go on to some more wedding related ones. So the first question is, oh, by the way, this should be like one word or short answers. Yeah.
Okay.
So hometown?
Hometown is Woodall Spa, Lincolnshire.
Married?
Yes.
Kids?
No, not yet.
Favourite colour?
Pink.
Are you a morning person or night owl?
Night owl.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Dream holiday destination?
Oh, Maldives, maybe.
Lovely. Favourite season?
Summer.
Of course. Rap music or rock music?
Oh, maybe rap.
Introvert or extrovert?
Extrovert.
Cool. Coming on to the wedding ones now. So UK or abroad weddings?
UK.
Large weddings or intimate weddings?
Large.
Country house or barn weddings?
Country house.
Band or DJ?
Band.
Traditional or unique?
Traditional.
Kids allowed or not allowed?
Oh, the ultimate question. Kids allowed.
Summer or winter weddings?
Summer.
Indoor or outdoor ceremony?
Indoor.
Speeches or no speeches?
Speeches.
Wine or champagne?
Champagne.
Beer or spirits?
Spirits.
Last question. Leaving early or last person standing?
Oh, I'm always the last person standing.
There you go. So that's the end of those questions. So we'll go on to the main the main discussion for today, which is obviously based around wedding planning. Hopefully, get some tips for either planning it yourself and also why you maybe should consider working with a wedding planner like yourself. So obviously, you've already introduced yourself a little bit about how you got into the journey. Do you want to just tell us a little bit more about your business as it is today? Obviously, what it's called and what your main services are and how you support the couples?
Yeah, sure. So my business is Bethany Rose Weddings. As you've already mentioned, I'm based in Lincolnshire, but kind of cover around all the other counties around it and beyond. And I really split into 3 different services for my couples. So the first service is full planning. So that's for couples that really haven't even started in their planning journey. They've probably just got engaged. They're still looking at venues, that kind of thing. Really, they've probably got an idea of their budget. But apart from that, haven't thought ahead. They've probably got a bit of a vision, but need a lot of help with all of the logistics and all of everything else that comes with planning a wedding. And then the second option I offer my couples is a service called partial wedding planning. So that might be for couples who have found their venue and they might even have found their core suppliers, so potentially their photographer, videographer maybe. But they need a bit of help wrapping it all up and actually like getting to grips with how the day is brought together. So that's where I come in. And then the third service I offer is wedding day management. So that's for couples that have got through the planning and they are now at a stage where they want to be able to enjoy their day as guests at their wedding and not worry about any of the logistics or any of the little issues that might crop up. And me and my team can be there to deliver their day to the vision that they've planned. So that's
make sure it runs smoothly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the part that a lot of couples probably when they're planning, they don't necessarily think about. So they've got an idea of exactly how it's going to run and they might have venue coordinators there on the day, but the venue coordinators are kind of there for the venue. So having somebody there on, dare I say, your team and to ensure that everything goes right and how you visualise it is really important too.
Yeah, well, that brings me on to my second question, which you've kind of answered some of it already, but what would you say like the key responsibilities are of a wedding planner?
I think that a wedding planner has to build great relationships. And in terms of that journey of planning, that is key, not just with the couples, but also with suppliers, because that trust that's built will allow relationships to form and couples to be able to share their, dare I say, their deepest secrets, because there's so much emotion that comes with planning a wedding. They need somebody there on their side to trust and to bounce ideas off. And that can be anything from, trusting what supply to go with to managing maybe a difficult relationship dynamic in a family. So that relationship management is key to being a wedding planner. Organisation is also very helpful. And it's not just, organisation, having your spreadsheets ready in there. It's about time management. I think what people might forget is that when you're a wedding planner, you're so focused in peak wedding season on the couples that have got their weddings that year, but you've also got clients that have just, they've just signed up to your service as well and they're a new client and they want that exclusivity and they want your time as well. So I'm very key on only taking on a limited number of couples to ensure that I can give that time to all of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're probably the most key elements of wedding planning.
Great. So effectively you should be looking for someone that's obviously not overstretched, who's got got experience in planning obviously organised, which
Yeah.
I'm definitely not as organised as I'd need to be a planner.
Yeah. And I think when people are deciding on a wedding planner, if that's the route they're taking,
Yeah.
I think that a lot of wedding planners can, it's probably quite clear of how many couples a wedding planner can take on. And don't be afraid, I would say, to ask your wedding planner, if it's somebody that you're considering, how many couples they take on.
Yeah.
Because that can sometimes form part of the exclusivity, and maybe, dare I say, the price they might be charging might reflect that as well, because you have to be mindful that the more time that you're getting from your wedding planner is brilliant for you, but it also comes at a cost for them because they're giving more time to you. So that there's a value in both of them, really, and it just depends what you want out of your wedding planner. Do you want somebody that's going to be able to give you all of their time, all of the week, to answer all your questions within 24 hours? Or are you quite happy to, take the reins a little bit in that wedding planning journey yourself and not have to have them all of the time and be like immersed in them all of the time?
So is there a typical sort of couple that would benefit more? Like, I guess everyone's different. Some people are quite confident at arranging stuff and managing themselves, but is there like a typical avatar, I guess, of someone that should really be considering having a planner?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different people and different couples that need and require wedding planners, and I think it draws back to maybe the amount and the exclusivity you need of a wedding planner. And I think, for example, my couples that usually come to me are people that have really busy lifestyles. They might have children. They probably have quite high demanding jobs, family, lots of things going on in their life. And to add the pressure of wedding planning to that can be extreme, and it can just cause a lot of overwhelm. And I think that lead up to their wedding, it takes the joy out of all of it.
I was going to say it can be actually quite stressful, and it doesn't make it the fun experience that it's meant to be. It
can be, and I hear as well that at the end of a wedding, I hear some couples say, "Oh, I'm almost a bit relieved," and I think that's quite sad, isn't it? And
I've heard that too, to be fair.
It's not because of the wedding day. The wedding day's usually been amazing, but that lead up has took over their life of the financial pressures and the planning and the logistics, and all of this is wrapped up in a wedding planner's service, which is why they can be invaluable to certain couples. But just going back to your question, I think there's couples that really need the hand holding entirely because of their lifestyle, but then there's also couples that probably have never been exposed to contracts before and have never been exposed to just things like floristry or the price of things and what coordination and all those things. They might have very different jobs, and that don't expose them to that kind of thing. So having somebody there as a support just to see them through those things, that's also what a wedding planner can do for them.
I guess that's a very valid point, because obviously from my own perspective, I got married 2 years ago, but I came with all this hidden knowledge that I wouldn't have had, and I guess the average groom definitely wouldn't have. I was probably far more active and inputting on plans than I guess the average groom or guy would be doing. Obviously, everyone's different. But I had all of this knowledge that I'd accrued from seeing so many weddings, which for me was great because I knew what worked and what didn't. But yeah, I imagine having pretty much zero knowledge and maybe only attending a few weddings in your life, actually having that person that has that knowledge and can relay it and let you know what works, what doesn't, is actually quite valuable.
Definitely.
So in terms of looking at budgets and affordability, you may think that wedding planning is only for people with big budgets, but I guess looking at it in reverse, you could potentially save couples money, or if you're not saving money, you're maybe keeping them on track so they're not going over. Is that quite an important part of the process?
Definitely, yeah. I think that there might be a misconception in the industry that wedding planning is only for, luxury elite couples and weddings. But of course, it does come at a price, and it's whether that service is really of value to you. And for me, if something is going to stress you out and overwhelm you and cause you maybe potentially your mental health to go downhill, then the price of that could potentially really be worth it. But I do completely appreciate that not everybody's budgets will stretch as far as being able to afford a wedding planner. So, yeah.
But you may well be able to advise them that actually you don't really need this, or that's overpriced, or that's a good price. And that insight that they may not have, you might actually indirectly save them money potentially.
Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely. I think not only are you able to sort of put supply recommendations to them based on so many things, whether that be their vision, whether that be their personality type. It's not just who I like working with. It's a very bespoke service that a wedding planner will offer you. And in turn, not only does that save you so much time, but like you said, the expertise and the tips and all of the things that I've been able to learn throughout my career will save them money. And that's not to say that they can't go looking for those tips and things on the internet themselves, but it all does really come down to time and how much time people have on their hands and if they get enjoyment out of it. And a lot of people don't enjoy the logistics and the budget and all of that kind of part of wedding planning. And that, going back to what we said, that then takes the shine off what's meant to be the most joyous occasion of your life.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's quite... all the lead up is just really a big admin task, really, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And
yeah.
not many people enjoy doing admin at the best of times.
No.
So how do you work with other vendors either on the day or before, on the lead up to the wedding, to kind of make sure everyone's coordinated and sort of working together as best as they can? And I guess checking that would you advise that maybe these suppliers aren't suited? I'm just thinking from my perspective, like photography and video, it helps that they've got two people of the same style. Like if we shoot differently, how in depth do you go with sort of reviewing their suppliers and making sure it all ties together?
Yeah, so when couples come to me, especially if they're like from the start of wedding planning, I really get to know my couples on quite a personal level. That's why building that trust and building that relationship is such a key skill of a wedding planner, because once you've been able to, ask all of those questions and understand the couple in quite a personal way, you're then able to suggest suppliers based on their personalities and based on their likes and dislikes and how they like to communicate and all of these things. And because I've been able to build those relationships with those suppliers myself, I know that certain suppliers will work better with some couples than others. So I think it's really difficult when you don't have a wedding planner potentially to go out and find these suppliers yourself. And, they might have this beautiful aesthetic that fits your wedding vision, but if they potentially, they don't have the same kind of vibe as you personality-wise, or everybody's so different. And I think you can't gauge that necessarily from a first call or something like that, whereas a wedding planner has the ability to do that, which is quite amazing, really.
I guess, yeah. For example, you've got your quirky couples out there, and there's certainly a whole realm of quirky suppliers as well, and they obviously naturally pull each other in, but it's maybe seeing that and suggesting, actually I do know a great photographer that is a little bit quirky and would really match your theme.
Like some couples are really laid back and they don't want loads and loads of communication, and they're quite happy for someone else, potentially like a wedding planner, to do lots. But then other couples, some some of my couples are really collaborative with me, which is also fine. And they want to really be involved with talking with that particular supplier. So I would make sure that I was selecting a supplier that had the time to do that with them. So these are the kind of considerations I make. And then going back to your question as well about how I communicate and tie it all in and tie the suppliers in, that supplier, that team of suppliers is like your core family on the day. As much as you've got your loved ones there, they have all got to work together in sync smoothly and well and create your day. And a lot of the time I work with similar suppliers that know each other and know how they like to work, so that communication is seamless, and it just provides a lot more of just a relaxed atmosphere behind the scenes when people know each other.
Yeah, again, I agree. I mean, although from my side, maybe 70% of the time I'm working with new suppliers, particularly obviously as videographer, the person I'm working closely with most is the photographer. 70% of the time I'd say it is someone new I've never met, and I've never had any issues. I have heard stories where there's been clashes and whatnot. So I would say it's beneficial if you have worked together before from my side. So yeah, even knowing that down to who's worked together before is important.
Yeah, and I also think that, we all started somewhere. So I think for any, suppliers that maybe are listening, for example, that are brand new starting out, it doesn't mean that, the door's shut on them completely. It's not a closed circle. There's opportunities, and you do get your foot in the door. Of course you do. But I suppose it's just building those connections is so important for that.
So thinking sort of as a couple, from a planner's sort of advice, what would you say are sort of in order of booking, I guess, not obviously every supplier, but what's the kind of hierarchy that people should be looking at in terms of order of booking? So you say they've secured a venue, what sort of suppliers should be next on the list and working their way down? In terms of like a timeline.
Yeah. No, I think that there's some key core ones, but it's really dependent on what priority is for the couple as well. So some couples will say that they've got a particular videographer in mind that they have been following on Instagram forever, and they have to have them. And I always ask this question: are there any suppliers that you have to have? Your wedding cannot run without them. Yeah. And if that's the case, then really we can sometimes even look at that supplier's availability before the date's even set, because if it really does rest on that supplier, it's no point in booking that venue and booking that date if they've had that person in mind. So, but if they don't have that, and if they don't have necessarily a preference of floristry being like top, and it has to be all about the flowers at their wedding, for example, then, all these things are considered when we look at which suppliers to book first. But ultimately up there really are photography, videography, floristry, and catering after venue. And then that's not to say all your other hair, makeup isn't important, but I have to appreciate that it can be overwhelming to ask my couples to make decisions so quickly when there is a time scale in front of us that we can do these things for. And as long as I don't have such a specific preference on a certain supplier, there is time for that.
Yeah. And I think people don't always appreciate, obviously, especially if it's your first wedding and you've not really had much experience before, like how far ahead you might actually need to book people. Certainly, like you say, your main suppliers, like, well, aside from venue, like video, photography, probably floristry as well, as one I had, again, I don't think about, but I'm sure it's probably true. How long in advance typically would you say, in the ideal world, you should be booking these people?
Usually my couples come to me around 18 months in advance for their wedding, and venue obviously is priority if there's nothing else. But after that, we would quickly move on to really, sort of 16 months, 12 months in advance, getting most other things nailed. I do think a lot of couples feel a lot of pressure to book suppliers without doing a lot of research, because they just think, I need to get a date booked. So I also think there's a fine balance between getting your suppliers booked in and doing your research on them and not being afraid to, I don't like the idea of shopping around as such, but
don't rush into
not rushing it. Yeah, there is a fine balance, but also really appreciating, don't hang around if you think that person is right, and don't not communicate with that person. I think it builds such a nice connection and relationship with suppliers if you can just drop people emails or just drop them a message, just say we just need another week to think. That's really appreciated, I think, in our industry.
Yeah, definitely.
That we say it all the time, but it really does hurt getting ghosted.
Yeah, for sure. If because obviously most suppliers will require some kind of deposit in advance, but I'm sure there's cases where someone doesn't want to pay that money right now because they either don't have it or they don't feel comfortable paying, say, 25% 2 years ahead. But realistically, that's just what you have to do to secure someone. But I would rather, in my instance, that someone was honest and said, we really do want you. We're struggling to get the 25%, but maybe we can give you 10% or 15%. I definitely would consider, I'd rather work with someone if I feel they're the right fit for me and vice versa.
Oh, definitely.
So don't be afraid, I guess, not to haggle, but...
I totally agree. I think as well that initial meeting or phone call or whatever process that wedding suppliers have in place before booking the couple is very much for the couple to find out if they're a right fit for you, but for you to also find out if they're a fit for them. And if you, and I'm sure this is the same for you, Chris, but if there's a couple that are sat in front of you and you feel like, oh, this couple, I just really want to film their wedding, they just seem like my kind of people. Yeah. You always get that, don't you? You always get that twinkle. And if that couple then ghosts you or goes cold on you, it's such a shame. And if it is for price reasons or something, then I'm sure, you just want to know, don't you? You just want that communication. And it goes for wedding planners too, because, and I'm not a saint, but I think a lot of the time I might inquire with a supplier and my couple takes such a long time to make a decision that it's just fallen on the back burner and I haven't got back to that supplier as well. So there's a real education around our industry in as a whole needing to also respond as wedding planners. Yeah,
it's very difficult. I've been on both ends. I've done it to other people. People do it to me all the time. I think it's just a human thing, I'll do that later. But yeah, if you can sort of think in the back of your mind, let's just keep people up to date, even if we're not ready yet, but we are really keen to book you. At least we know that we can kind of pencil you in and maybe follow up and jog your memory maybe.
And even if it's a no, I really appreciate if somebody tells me it's a no. Yeah. And even if I just love to, I don't mind what the reason is. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but knowing that reason is so helpful for everybody's businesses as well, which is not the English kind of thing to do. You'd rather just leave the email cold, wouldn't you? Yeah. But it's so helpful. It really is.
So looking back across your career, what would you say are the common problems you've come across during weddings? Any juicy gossip, things that have gone on during the wedding, or common things that happen that couples should be aware of? Or
I can't disclose too much, but I would say that something that does surprise people quite a lot, which doesn't seem to faze me anymore, is how much weddings affect relationship dynamics, whether that be family, whether that be best friends, bridesmaids, groomsmen. There always seems to be something. And I think it's because weddings are so highly emotive. And I think that relatives, potentially mums and grandparents and dads, back in their day, they didn't have weddings to the extravagance that we have. So they almost potentially want to live out the wedding that they would have loved to have had, which I completely appreciate and understand. And especially when they might have some financial involvement as well, you've got to appreciate that. But it does come with some pressures, and navigating them and giving couples advice is something that I seem to do quite regularly. So a lot of couples will say, oh God, I bet we're, the most difficult couple you've ever had. But it's really not like that at all. Everybody experiences it. And I've seen like bridesmaids falling out in the morning of the wedding, and trying to shield your couple from as much drama and keep it away from them is something that I think is really important, and just trying to manage those kind of issues that might be arising is part of my job, definitely.
So yeah, obviously it's a stressful time. It can be before and during, potentially, especially if something happens. There's always one thing that happens at least that doesn't go to plan. And if you're like me, the sort of person that really frustrates me when something isn't exactly as I envisioned it. Like we had a little bit of rain on our day, but thankfully it was very minor, but that was annoying. But what can you do about it? Like, how can couples either avoid or reduce the stress either on the lead up and during the day?
Yeah, I think weather's a big stress that I think people get quite caught up with. And I think having a plan for a wet weather plan that you are equally as happy with, if possible, as your sunny weather plan is ideal. So when looking for venues and things, I know as much as you would love to have an outdoor wedding, ensuring that backup plan is just as beautiful and something you can visualize just as well is important. But managing overwhelm and stress in the lead up, I always recommend to couples to make sure they plan in date nights. And I don't mean, especially when budgets are restricted, I don't mean going to a lavish London restaurant. I mean like having a coffee in bed and deciding on your photographer, or just allowing yourself that time to get excited for something and plan it into your schedule is really important, because if you leave things to the last minute and potentially the groom or the bride is individually looking through these quotes and getting really overwhelmed by herself, and you haven't built in a bit of time to do those things, I think that's when the pressure builds, and that's when bickering can start and arguments can start. And then that's when the joy is taken out of the planning experience.
Is there any ways that you've come across that, a good way to get the groom involved? Because obviously, to stereotype a little bit, I would assume that primarily the bride does a lot of the decision making in most relationships. That may be a bit of a strong statement, but for someone, if you're in that situation that your partner, being the groom, isn't really showing much interest, have you found any ways that you can maybe bring them in a bit more, get them a bit more excited and involved?
Yeah, I think even in my same-sex relationships and couples, that there's always potentially that
there's always a dominant
there's always
person that is in charge in any relationship.
Definitely, and I've even seen the grooms be the one that's a bit more more interested. So whichever side is maybe not as interested, you can kind of tell on venue visits and things. So what I do is I always sort of ask what is their priority. So what are they most looking forward to on the wedding day? And that might be, for example, choosing their suits, or it might be, that they're really interested in the entertainment, and sort of giving them a bit more of a hold on that element is really important. But ensuring that it's not then down to the other person to make all the decisions. Like, I would really love, in an ideal world, for couples to be able to make decisions together, but we don't live in an ideal world here. So, making sure that everybody's got their piece of the puzzle and owning that is quite important when it comes to that situation.
Yeah. And I guess maybe if you can, like, give them something to focus on, that's like their part to organise. I don't know what that, like you say, entertainment, or it could be wedding cars or choosing the band or anything like that.
And sometimes they're just not that interested. And if the other person is fine with sort of taking the lead on the decisions and things, then, that's also fine. Not every couple is going to fit that mould. So it doesn't matter too much, really.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can try.
Exactly. Okay, so coming on to sort of the last question then, really, which is quite an important one. So for someone that's just sort of starting out, they're recently engaged, starting their wedding planning journey, where should they start? What sort of things should they be thinking about first?
Okay, so I always say your budget comes first. But for that budget, you really need to know an idea of guest numbers. And I don't just mean like picking 80 guests out of the air. I mean really nailing a bit of a rough guest list, so you know how many friends, how many aunties, uncles, that kind of thing. Like build a rough guest list in, so you know your numbers and you know potentially evening guests as well, because that forms such a large chunk of your wedding budget. So once you've got that, being able to break down your budget into your specific supplier categories, whether that be venue, photographer, videographer, prioritising those suppliers that you know are must-haves. So, if you're really keen on having Chris as your videographer, you can inquire on the price. Yeah. And so that's in there and you've got that idea. But I don't think there's any point in visiting venues that are out of your budget, because it just sets the bar and sets the expectation that, unfortunately, that's just not for everybody. Not everybody can afford, the most lavish of venues. So going to view venues, knowing that they're in your price range, or potentially might be just a bit out, but you might be able to wiggle your budget elsewhere, is going to set you up much better than being disappointed. So that's where you need to start. And then from there, I would say build your timeline. So once you've got your date, or at least you've got an idea of when you want your wedding to be, working back from that and setting big decisions in throughout that timeline, so that you've got a scope and it's not all coming at once and it's not all going to be overwhelming, and you can build those little date nights in as well and make those decisions together. And I think it just makes the experience a lot more seamless, dare I say easier, and it's not all done and like becomes really overwhelming for you. So budget and timeline, and enjoy as much as you can.
The rest will fall into place.
Exactly.
And I always say, regards price and budgets and stuff, within reason, there's a supplier at every price point generally.
Yeah.
Whatever that may be. I mean, I always look from video photography side of things. You can hire a photographer for £400. You can hire a photographer for £4,000. It's finding the best supplier you can for the budget that you have. That's just what I always say to couples.
Absolutely. And when you set that budget, you be really realistic about that. If that's what you've got, that's what you've got. The worst thing you can do with wedding planning is overstretching your budget and getting yourself into financial situations which cause you to lose sleep at night. We've all been there, and it's not fun. It's really not fun when it's the lead up to your wedding day. No. So there is a supplier out there for everybody, and you will find them. And there's wedding planners if you need that expertise, of course. But if not everybody can afford that potentially, then there are suppliers out there. It's just doing your research really and not overstretching yourself.
Amazing. Well, I think that's really insightful conversation. So hopefully people have took a lot away from that. I will leave your details in the descriptions below if anyone wants to find you and give you a follow.
Thank you.
And yeah, I really appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on the I Do's and Do Nots podcast.
Thank you very much.